preview it, it'll transition on its own.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Camera 4.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our coverage of local elections here in Brevard County. I'm John Torres, the engagement editor at Torres today, and I'm pleased to be joined by two great minds who will help us analyze tonight's results. Right here to my left, we have Chris Muro, professor here at Eastern Florida State College. Thank you for being here, Chris. We're also joined by Eric Hoppenbrower, executive director at the Brevard Business Voice Political Action Committee. Thank you for joining us. The polls just closed at 7 p.m. And Brevard's supervisor of elections has usually been pretty good at posting results right away. So hopefully we will have some interesting things to chat about shortly. We will be looking only at local races and results, and we'll leave the statewide results for you, Chris, in the next hour. So hang tight, folks. After this show's over, we have Chris here to talk about all these statewide elections. Now, I'm just curious, guys, which elections or which races or which issue interests you the most tonight?
Well, John, I would say one of the most interesting parts of this ballot tonight is how large the ballot actually is. We've got 4 pages in most districts. 3 of the pages are ballot questions. There's 1 page with people on it. So there's 75% direct democracy, 25% representative democracy. And from a perspective of American political theory, we're a little bit out of balance. We're not quite doing it right. The founders would call this spectacles of turbulence, is what James Madison described direct democracy. And of course, we need a little bit of it, but I think it's overwhelming for the voters, and I'm fascinated to see how these county referenda, the charter revisions, turn out. And of course, Palm Bay has got a lot on its ballot tonight as well.
And, you know, I feel like there was a full page of should we retain Florida Supreme Court Justice, insert name here.
Absolutely.
Almost every single one of them was up, it seemed.
Well, we have 11 total, 5 from the Supreme Court and 6 from the 5th District Court of Appeals. We have 7 members on the Florida Supreme Court, so having 5 of the 7 up for retention is extremely unusual.
Right.
And John,
and Eric, what are you interested in?
Ballot fatigue, as Dr. Murrow is intimating, is going to be huge. Why? As you get further and further down the ballot, what you see typically is fewer and fewer votes cast. So those folks who can get through that long ballot will end up deciding what those measures will, whether or not what those measures will pass.
Yeah, that's interesting because, you know, I actually know people who have told me they always vote no on everything. So, you know, whatever they ask.
Which is very interesting because in the 46 years with these judges, 46 years we've been doing this retention election, not one judge has ever been voted out.
I was going to ask you, how often is that the case?
Not in Florida, never. And no one's that good, John. I'm just...
Now, speaking of judges, have you guys ever seen so much interest in a county judge race? This isn't even like the circuit judge, right. But we have Renee Torpy, who's she has received support from Wayne Ivey, right. The sheriff here, obviously, and she's up against Kimberly Musselman, a prosecutor, who alleges that Ivey asked her not to run, that it's not your night, kid, basically one of those. And she refused and is running, and it's been pretty hot and heavy. There's been lots of stuff on like social media, some good debates. We had them both on at FloridaToday.com. Really great conversations. What do you guys see in that race, and why the interest?
Well, typically voters have very little information about the judges, typically the local judges that they vote on. So this year, as you've seen with the debate that you all had, we've gotten more information. So I think the question comes down to whether or not the voters really support Judge Ivey's endorsement, because Kimberly Musselman has a slew of endorsements of many of the public figures that you see typically go with the sheriff. So that's the real question.
I think it's fascinating as well, John. You bring up it's a county judgeship. I mean, county judges hear misdemeanor cases.
Right.
19-year-old drinking a beer at the beach in Satellite Beach, gets arrested, violates an ordinance. I mean, these are the types of small claims. These are the types of cases that are heard. at the county level. So to have this kind of drama, energy, interest, high-profile endorsements is definitely unusual.
You know, I'm friends with Judge Majid, who was on the county bench for a long time until he retired. Great guy, and he always told me that he loved to be on the county bench and not the circuit bench. And he was offered a chance to run several times for that, but he says that on the county level, you can still change somebody's life, because as you said, it's, you know, drinking beer, it's, you know, public urination, or, you know, whatever. You can still change somebody's life. So, interesting stuff. What do you guys feel about the two countywide referendums, the EELS and the school millage rate proposed increase?
Well,
Eric, please.
Business Voice, the organization that I represent, they're supporting both referendum, and actually for two different reasons. But at the same time, it's all about business. In terms of the EELS referendum, they see the value in protecting our ecosystem, because when large corporations want to move their organizations here, that's a selling point for their employees to come move here, which it's cheaper to bring their employees here versus have to find new employees. On the other hand, when it comes to schools, property taxes have a lot to do with the value of our schools. So anytime you see a realtor ask questions about where someone wants to move to, it's always close to a good school. And so that's where the business community wants to support both of these referendum.
I think there's a number of, I think it's unfortunate that we didn't really have a public conversation about these issues. EELS, it's going to pass. We know it's going to pass tonight. It's going to get at least 65% of the vote. And if you look at the ballot language, you know, are you in favor of woodlands, wetlands, grasslands, and baby bunnies? Well, of course, we all are. We all are. But when it comes to the efficacy of the actual program, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. We're talking about financing another $50 million. Most people are unaware that its current fiscal year budget, the EELS program, is about $6 million. It's allocated $125,000 for land acquisition.
Wow.
$125,000. I don't know how much land that's going to buy you.
Not much, right?
In 2022.
Not now, yeah, exactly.
And there are some questions from previous years. This program's been around for 30 years. There are some previous some questions that have gone unanswered. That is, some land has been purchased for prices that are well above the market value. There's really no accountability, and the Citizen Oversight Committee that both of the referendum are supposedly creating, I'm a pretty easy guy to get a hold of. I've never heard from the Independent Citizens Oversight Committee about any of the fiscal review that they've done.
Right.
So I think there's some really important questions that have just gone unanswered, and I guess it's going to be another 20 years before we get a chance to talk about it, because it will pass tonight.
That's true. Plus, as you see, every time you see a referendum, county referendum, you do see those citizen oversight committees.
Yeah.
And the question is, how effective are they? That's really the question.
Yeah, and who appoints these people? Who are they? I mean, these are all great questions that, again, I'd like to see an answer to.
Yeah, and I'm curious, how do you guys feel about the charter amendment change to recall school board members? That's which is on there. I mean, I always felt like elections are when you recall people who you don't want in office anymore. But what do you guys feel about that?
So charter revision number 3
Yep.
On our ballot. As a principle, I'm from political theory point of view, I would be opposed as well, John, to the concept of the recall. If a official engages in malfeasance or negligence or drunkenness, that's one of the grounds, they can be removed from office. We know Governor DeSantis has done this, removing school board members in Brevard County, state attorneys over in Hillsborough. So that's really the remedy for it. As far as the recall goes here in Brevard County, we've had it in place for 12 years for sheriff and clerk of the court. No one's ever been recalled.
Right.
And the reason is because it's a very difficult process. You have to have grounds, and you have to prove those grounds in court.
Right.
And so we might feel good about voting yes on it, but it's not going to have any practical implication.
I got you. And I did not lie to you, folks. We do have some early results already, so they are already coming in. So, surprise, surprise, Tom Goodson is way ahead of the NPA candidate, Tademea Smith, for County Commission at District 2. Rob Feltner is also running away with seat 4A against the write-in candidate who wasn't really the candidate. It looks like the Musselman-Torpy race is right now at 55% for Kimberly Musselman. So I'm a little surprised at that. I don't know if you guys are. We haven't mentioned school board race yet too. I mean, that's a like real biggie. The primaries, it was too close to call, right, in the primaries. So they have the runoff tonight. Aaron Dunn, Gene Trent, they're both hovering at around 50% right now. Now, these votes that are being tabulated now, these are just the absentee and the write-in and the mail-in vote, like the early voting, right? Is that what we're saying?
Well, we should be seeing, depending on how many precincts are reporting, we should be seeing not only the early vote tabulation, but also the election day tabulation as well.
I see, okay. And what do you guys feel about that school board race? It's supposed to be a nonpartisan race, but school boards have almost become the new battleground, if you will, for politics in this country, the right and the left. And even though it's supposed to be nonpartisan, we can see obviously that it is partisan.
It's a reaction to a cultural moment, and it actually goes along with the charter amendment about recalling school board members. I think those two, both the race and the charter amendment, go together. Typically, you could talk about it being a part of a broader national narrative, but as you can see with this race and this amendment, it's coming close to home. So we'll see how this kind of falls out, but I think the reality is we can no longer call any nonpartisan race nonpartisan in reality.
Oh, absolutely. I think that goes with judicial races as well to a certain extent. But when we went to nonpartisan, it was mandated in the year 2000. The argument was we want to take the politics out of the school board race. That was the argument to sell moving to nonpartisan. And I always think it's a mistake to take away information from voters. And when you deny the ability for a candidate to identify with a party, that is one of the most important pieces of information that a voter has. Right. And so I think taking that information away from the voter does a disservice to the electorate and to the process in general.
Here's one that's really interesting right now too. And the precincts reporting are 0 out of 35, so this must be just the early voting, I guess, right? But Yance and Fine for State Representative District 33, we've got Randy Fine at like 51% and Anthony Yance, the realtor, at like around 48.5%. Any surprises there, or?
A little closer than I had anticipated, but if this is just early voting, that should change because Republicans have normally had a stronger turnout, at least in Brevard County.
With the early voting?
On election day.
Oh, on election day, right,
voting.
Gotcha.
But as a story ran in Florida today just recently, that 2018 going into election day, Democrats had a 31,000 advantage vote. In 2020, 125,000 vote advantage going into election day. But this year, Republicans have a 280,000 vote advantage going into election day. This is the first time ever since we've been doing early voting, John, that
Wow.
Republicans have an advantage. So I'm expecting to see Randy Fine's lead grow as the real-time results come in.
Yeah, he's his last two elections, if I am not mistaken, he's won by more than 10%.
He's never won by less than 11%.
Okay, there you
Actually,
go.
it's been 13, 11, and 11. So I think what we're going to see here is business as usual, and that's because Republicans actually vote almost 3 times more likely in person, both early and on election day.
Now, why is that?
I think it's voter preference. I think Democrats, as you see around the county, love to vote by mail. I think it's also for the local Democrat Party a strategic advantage because they focus directly, especially in South Brevard, on turning out their vote by mail ballots. You haven't seen it in the same rates that you've seen 2 years ago. I think that has to be attributed somewhat to the pandemic being now over. But I think what you'll see is business as usual in that district.
Interesting. Speaking of, like voter turnout, Chris, what should we expect here locally in Brevard for the midterm election? Is it, like normally a pretty high turnout, or Historically, what do they tell us the numbers?
Well, historically, in Brevard County, since 2002, we'll go back to 2002, Brevard County actually has had a higher turnout than the state of Florida as a whole. But 2002, 2006, the turnout in those midterms were in the high 50s, mid to high 50s. Of course, as Eric pointed out, in 2018, it was 67%. So I think we're expecting to see somewhere around 67% tonight. That would not be surprising to see a real strong turnout this evening.
Anecdotally, Eric, I spoke to some poll workers earlier today when I voted, who said that there was a really big turnout for them, and so they were pleased and happy, especially with the storm coming, and people are doing some home prep and stuff. Have you heard something today about turnout or?
Not typically, I mean, not anecdotally, but you know what I have seen? A higher volume in traffic around town. So I think, in part, both of those issues are driving a lot of people to get things done before the hurricane gets here.
Gotcha. Now, some other local races that are interesting. The town of Indialantic has been in the news recently, not for things that I'm sure they want to be, but claims of anti-Semitism, hate speech. One of the candidates, Melvin Chang, is up against Lauren Strand. Chang has had some issues with the outgoing mayor, Dave Berkman, who is Jewish. Right. And it's just kind of sad, I guess. The mayor was arrested recently for allegedly attacking Chang. And, it's just wild that all these little, towns, they seem to have the most drama. Why is that?
That's a great question. I mean, I try not to wade into the Jerry Springer type of political environment, but this is 2022, and that does seem to be becoming more commonplace. And that's why, I really appreciate Florida Today, and, Eastern Florida State College is always committed to civility in our public discourse. So, when we have instances like this, I do think it's a stain on our representative democracy.
I only wish that the people who emailed me would be more civil, But
technology is definitely moving our public conversation in a way that I don't think anybody can appreciate. But as you can see, certain candidates love to take those hinge issues and expand them into the public consciousness in a way to move the electorate, I think, in ways that they want them to in terms of getting out the vote.
One of the other big issues that I keep hearing about this year is growth. Like the city of Cocoa, Satellite Beach, even, dealing with the height of, buildings on the beach and things like that. Is that a recurring theme in the county? How to grow properly, the right infrastructure. We're already having some issues with some wastewater in certain areas.
Absolutely. Growth management is always a major question, especially in Florida. And I don't know if you know this, but Florida is the #1 destination in the country. Last year we had 265,000 net gain of 265,000 people in Florida. That's 711 new people a day moving to our state, while California lost 375,000, 903 people a day net loss in California, leaving that state. So Florida is the #1 destination in the world. And the #1 destination in the world is the United States, and we're #1 within #1. So we definitely have to have policies that are geared towards urban development, growth management, and of course, natural resources, and all of those things that will continue to make Florida hospitable to business, to growth, and to new residents.
Yeah.
Big issues.
Eric, what do you think that Tom Goodson and Rob Feltner bring to the county commission? Is it going to be more of the same, mindset on the county commission, or what can we expect, you think?
Well, Tom Goodson is a known public official. He's been in public office here along the years here over the last at least 10, 15 years. I know he was at the State House before he had to retire because of term limits. He's known. He's been here. He's built a business here. And I think a lot of the folks who run government here know him, like him. And you could say that things will be as usual. But I noticed in our interviews with him that he was really personable and that he was willing to listen to anybody that comes to him and hear him out. I mean, but he's also a really honest person when it came to telling people where he stands on issues. When it comes to District 4's candidate, Mr. I'm forgetting his name right now.
Rob Feltner.
Rob Feltner.
Yep.
He's a local political operative, and also he swings mostly a little bit more conservative than even the current office holder. So we'll see how he translates his views and his ideology onto the dais.
Chris, is it good for an area to have one party in control? Like the county commission will be all Republican?
Well, I mean, I think most of us at least could agree that we like to see competition in elections. It holds elected officials accountable. They don't take for granted that they're going to be able to be reelected until they're term limited out of office. So I think it's good to have a healthy conversation, that there's competition. But in order to do that, if you're in an area like Brevard County that has 65,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats, it would require Democrats to be more competitive. They, I think, would have to maybe amend some of their policy positions. That does not seem to be the case over the past few decades. And so, it's either you have one of two options. Either you're ideologically a purist and you're going to, do that and suffer defeat, or you're going to moderate and try to bring in, have a larger tent. And those are really your only two options. So far, that's why we have really a one-party dominant system here in Brevard County. And I'm not seeing anything on the horizon that shows that we're going to move away from that kind of paradigm.
Eric, what does our local Democratic Party have to do to sort of recharge its masses or to revitalize itself? They've had some tough times, and this last year was not good for them.
No doubt, absolutely. I think Dr. Moreau is touching on it, that realistically they have to really ask themselves what part of their party platform really resonates with voters, and then communicate it to them consistently and I think overtly. So sometimes, this year, if you're looking at national elections, the top three issues for voters are jobs and the economy, inflation, and immigration. And they map the Republican Party identically to those three issues. What are the top three issues for Democrats, at least as far as their party platform? January 6th, abortion, and our democracy. So unfortunately, their top three issues are not aligned with the overall voter issues. And what I think that they should do is, if I could give them any type of hints here, is to really take a part of their populist economic platform and shift it to the voters that I think they haven't talked to in a long time, which is your blue-collar voters. They basically switched to the Republican Party, and I think that's where you see a lot of diversity of thought right now in terms of competition in the Republican Party here locally in our primaries.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Chris or Eric, which local races are of interest to you, or if any, or are we going to see any surprises tonight in Palm Bay or Melbourne or Titusville or on city council races or anything?
I don't see any surprises lurking out there. It does seem. I was surprised, though. I have to be honest. Kenny Johnson in Palm Bay. I think he ran an exceptional campaign, and I received many mailers and contacts from the Johnson campaign, as I'm a resident of Palm Bay. The advertisements were well done. They were focused on issues. He even came out and said that we have to keep the cap in place on ad valorem tax revenue increases in Palm Bay, which is revision number 8 for Palm Bay tonight. So that's fascinating. I'm really interested to see, is Kenny Johnson going to be reelected there, and will revision number 8 from the Palm Bay charter revisions, will that go down in flames? That would be interesting to see.
Johnson is ahead right now, about 58% to 43%, with only 2 of the 14 precincts reporting. What about you, Eric? Any interest in the local races tonight?
Well, me personally and the Business Voice are really focused on the school board. I think when you pair it with the primary election that's now in the general in District 2 and the millage, if you pair those two together in a way that I think that the business community supports, what you'll see is an improvement to the quality of education and getting away from some of the more divisive cultural issues. I think over the last 2 years or so, you could even go back all 4 years, since 2016, we've seen cultural issues become most of the conversation in our politics. When it comes to school boards in the last 2 years, it's become at 11. So honestly, I think a lot of the folks in the business community want to see business as usual, but from a strategic perspective, I think what we're seeing is public education is radically changing, and the question is, how are public officials who are in charge of those budgets going to see how that change occurs? Because school choice is here to stay. It's popular. It continues to change the dynamic in terms of how many children are in our public schools, and that kind of option will create a budget, let's just say, issue for the current administration and every administration thereafter.
Schools for years have asked for more involvement from parents. Are they now regretting that?
It does seem to be the case, at least over the past year and a half or so. There's been allegations of cracking down on parents who have been attending school board meetings, even the Department of Justice getting involved, the hearings on Capitol Hill over this. So definitely this has come to the forefront. Perhaps the pandemic had something to do with that, but bringing these cultural issues now out front and center. And a lot of parents have been getting involved. Moms for Liberty organization, really its first annual event had Ron DeSantis as its keynote. That's pretty impressive.
It's a very powerful group, yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Wow, okay, we have some more results coming in, so let's take a look at those. Let's see. Randy Fund with about 4 precincts in, plus the early voting, he's at like 51%. Yance at 48%, so that's still kind of close. It's a slight, pull away. Let's see if there's any other surprises here, or what a surprise! All the Supreme Court, justices are all being, voted back in, as you said, Chris. Tay DeMaya Smith for County Commission District 2 has almost like 30% of the vote with 4 precincts in. That's impressive, I think.
So, John, we actually, the Business Voice, interviewed him, and he had the most energy of any candidate that I personally have ever seen. And what I could tell from that interview is he really loves not only the community of Cocoa, but Brevard County as a whole. And he really wants to shake up business as usual in our public affairs. So I'm not surprised he's getting 30% as an MPA. Plus, I think also, as you see in our county, more and more people every day register as an MPA. In fact, and the Florida Today had an article about it, that now when you're talking third party and MPA voters, in total, a greater amount of voters than the local Democrat Party. And that's been a trend that's been happening over the last 5 years.
Wow. Why is that, Chris? Why are like people choosing to identify as NPA, or registering as NPA?
Well, it's interesting because I think in political science, this is a big question that we research and we've been researching for decades. In Massachusetts, the largest group of voters in Massachusetts are actually unenrolled, not affiliated with a party. Democrats have 2.4 million voters, Republicans 429,000. But those NPAs, when they vote Democratic. And NPAs in Brevard County vote Republican, and if you're in Broward County, they're voting Democratic. So it does seem that independents and those who are not affiliated with a party, they do tend to gravitate towards the dominant party within that region or in that state. So I think there's a lot of attention that's put on the NPA and the rise of independence, but I think there's a little bit too much fanfare for the results that we've seen.
Gotcha.
So I don't think that it's as dramatic a shift as it's sometimes is talked about.
And speaking of results, with about 30 of the 171 precincts in, Kimberly Musselman has 55%, and Renee Torpy's at about 46. Any surprise there so far, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would think that the Ivy endorsement. And the Torpy name. The Torpy name is, Vince Torpy
Right.
served on the 5th District Court of Appeals, and it's been a household name in Brevard County for decades. This is surprising.
What would you attribute this to?
Well, I mean, there's many factors I think that can go into it. Honestly, I think to a certain degree, the controversies over the last few months with the sheriff have maybe tarnished his endorsement a bit, because he's one of the more popular, he's actually the most popular politician here in Brevard County. And so I think that sometimes, as we've seen with other types of issues surrounding candidates or the political process, and I think this speaks back to the MPA question or debate, is disenfranchisement with some of the politics as usual. It may not actually translate to changes in the election as it goes, but I mean, what you're seeing is, and I've seen a lot of this knocking doors around the county, is many of our MPAs, yes, are actually conservative, but they don't think the Republican Party is actually conservative enough. Right?
Oh, wow, interesting.
So I definitely think that sometimes bad press can be bad press.
Speaking of the sheriff's endorsement, should the sheriff or the prosecutor or the public defender endorse judicial candidates? I mean, doesn't that seem, if you get an endorsement from one, it just seems like it could open up some issues in court.
Well, I think the problem is when you judicial elections in the first place. When you have a judicial election, you're automatically inserting politics into a branch of government that was designed to be apolitical. So whenever you have an election, people have to raise money, they have to make promises, and that's, I don't think, what we want in our judges. We don't have this at the federal level, and a lot of people are much more informed about federal judges and what federal courts do and what the Supreme Court does. And very few people are informed about what local judges do, even though they have this vote for them. The interesting thing to me, too, is that 91% of our county judges and circuit court judges, those races go unopposed. The only time you get to really vote for a judicial candidate is they're not a judge yet, just like we have here an open seat in this race. Once they get elected as a judge, it's pretty much guaranteed that they're going to be able to serve as many 6-year terms as they want to until they're 75 years old
Right.
now. So I think the question of the efficacy of judicial elections needs to be talked about more. But the outcome in this particular race, if you're going to have a judicial election, when you have prominent figures in the community making endorsements, I think that just goes along with the elections process.
Right, yeah.
I don't know, Eric, I'd like to hear what you think about that, though.
Well, I think it goes along with the party affiliation question, right? So everyone knows the party affiliation of the sheriff, and so if the sheriff endorses somebody, he's putting that brand on him. In this case, you had Republicans on both sides.
Right.
That's what made it so interesting.
Right, because we had our top prosecutor, Phil Archer, endorsed Busselman, right? And of course, Sheriff Ivey endorsed Torpy. Boy, we may have to have a runoff to a runoff to a runoff. Aaron Dunn and Gene Trent are, neck and neck at like 49.3 for Dunn and 50.7 for Trent. Would they settle this with an arm wrestling, bout or what?
Well, I only think it's that close because of the nonpartisan part of the election.
Right.
Because that district is actually decidedly Republican in terms of its voter registration. So I think, like we saw 2 years ago with Jennifer Jenkins's election, what you're seeing in returns doesn't actually reflect in the actual vote count, at least early. Of course, in that election, Jennifer Jenkins's team did an excellent job at chasing those mail ballots, and she decidedly beat Tina Descovich almost 2-to-1 in mail ballots.
Since there's only one precinct reporting in that race, it does seem that we've got a number of precincts that for the election day vote return still outstanding.
Yes.
That may favor Gene Trent. And I don't know how much the Florida Today article about his resume and some of the issues there, if maybe that resonated with the voters as well,
Right,
and
perhaps,
maybe that's why it's as close as it is.
Yeah, and what you referenced is there was a question about whether he was honest or not in his application for employment X amount of years ago, whatever, about some legal issue that he had or didn't have. So that's, which has not been cleared up yet, by the Lake School Board, which I actually just wrote a column about, how hard is it to go back to a person's application and resume and just look at it and
Come to a
and see what's on
conclusion.
there. I mean,
Right.
I actually criticized the state attorney's office too for the investigation on prosecutorial misconduct that happened back in April. It's been 5 months. I mean, just watch the tape of the trial. It was a one-day trial. Anyway, just irksome.
Well, no, I think I want to say I appreciate the Florida Today's reporting on that, the Brian Avon situation, and the Lakeisha Mitchell and Joy King Castro case
Yes.
as well. I really appreciate Florida Today's investigative reporting on that.
Yeah, and it's I'm going to get out of my soapbox for a minute. I have written a lot about Crosley Green and wrongful incarcerations and wrongful convictions, and I'm dismayed at how the state keeps on defending stuff even when it's brought to light that it probably was not a really good conviction, that there were some issues with it. But that's an argument for another show, which hopefully they'll ask me back.
There you go.
So we'll see. Excuse my voice, folks. I've had a flu and my cough. I normally don't sound like Demi Moore, as my wife says, but I am these days. So excuse me for that. Let's take a look and see if there's any more results coming in that will interest our viewers here. So, cocoa is interesting. Growth in cocoa is a big deal. We've got, like 6 or 7 candidates, going for 3 seats. We have some newcomers. What is the climate like in cocoa these days politically?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I know a lot of talk about CRAs, specifically the Diamond. I forget the name of the Diamond CRA. Always a question as to how public dollars are being spent, especially in those special districts. When it comes to development, I guess each and every single little municipality that we have in our county here has to decide which way they want to go. Multifamily housing or single-family residential. There's positives and negatives to both, and I think that mix is going to tell you how the municipalities' governing bodies decide they want to have their municipalities grow. How Cocoa decides to grow because they're unique in that they have that nice little downtown, and then obviously sprawling out, and the 524 corridor is another question as we see industrial growth moving westward. Is one of those factors that city council will have to tackle.
Yeah, and what's interesting here, Eric, and I'm just looking at these results that are coming in. We mentioned earlier all the chatter at the end, all our county charter proposals and stuff, and all of them are all passing with about 70% or so, except for the charter proposal 6, the workforce and supportive housing, which only has about 53% yes right now. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't that for an establishment of a fund and sort of group to deal with affordable housing in the county, which is an extreme need, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Absolutely. Well, we've seen prices of homes and the cost of rents have gone up dramatically over the past few years. And so I don't know how the business pack is feeling about this, but having affordable housing, I think, is an important factor in luring businesses and growth to our county. So that is surprising that it is as receiving the fewest votes of the 6 proposals that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking with folks in Melbourne and Palm Bay, and the whole homelessness issue is huge, and it'll get more pronounced as the cold weather starts moving in, and we start seeing folks and the need for beds and all that. So that's interesting. The school millage rate increase is also passing at about 60%. I think that was. Hold on, let's see where that was here, and the EELS. The EELS, county referendum is about 70.7%, yay, and the ad valorem millage to increase the teacher pay is at almost about 60%. So, with 78, precincts reporting out of 171, so no surprises there, as we expected, right?
As expected.
Yeah.
With cocoa, cocoa, as you brought up, John, is it has had its challenges as far as recently with law enforcement issues, the development and business investment in cocoa has not kept up pace with, definitely with Melbourne and Palm Bay. But I do think cocoa's future is getting brighter. I think the space industry continues to make its rebound from the NASA cuts. Eastern Florida State College is investing $87 million in renovating the cocoa campus. So I think that there's a lot of positive developments that are on the horizon for cocoa, and I think that it's going to see a lot of economic benefits over the next few years.
Gotcha. And it looks like a few races might have all of their precincts in like Melbourne Beach. For example, it looks like Joyce Barton and Corey Runty are going to retain their seats on the town commission. Steve Walters, who had been on the commission and a former police chief, is trailing there with about 23%. And Melbourne Village, that looks like all the precincts are, well, it's one precinct and out of one. And the leader there has 21%, 265 votes out of 5 candidates, with only 5. So we have like Fred Anderson with 265 votes and Bridget Forster with 260. So when do you ask for a recount?
Yeah.
And count. And count.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And recount.
So looking 2 years down the road. Okay, if you can look into your crystal balls for a moment, what issues are we going to be talking about here at this table in 2 years, do you think?
Well, locally, I think, the phrase is smart growth, and I guess the question on my mind, and I think on many voters' minds, is what's your definition of smart, right? So as we have to deal with some of these as bodies, as public bodies, they have to deal with some of these amendments, charter amendments, or some of the ballot referendum, is how to be able to put those specific dollars to use for those specific issues, but also trying to expand tighter and tighter budgets because of things like inflation towards the necessary infrastructure, for instance, when it comes to dealing with that growth that Chris was talking about earlier. And no one's going to stop coming to Florida, specifically here in Brevard County, because of the diversity in our industry, which is actually not talked about. How many different types of industries, the strong manufacturing base that we have here, which is just not paralleled. I could say across the country, but that would be too verbose.
Yeah.
I think it would be in our region when it comes to the defense industry and aerospace together, what you see in terms of manufacturing, supporting those national and international programs, it's very attractive, not only to large businesses, but for people trying to escape high tax states.
I think it's a great point Eric makes, and that is the diversification of industries here in Brevard County. I mean, 20 years ago, hospitality was dominant, but now we've got high-tech aviation, lots of growth in the medical field, and so, like Eric said, the median incomes have been rising, and we definitely have a much more diverse workforce than we've ever had at any point in Brevard's history, and that will continue to be a major issue moving forward.
Eric mentioned smart growth, and what is smart growth? Is there a trick, or is there a tactic to get everybody on the same page, or the towns, the villages, the cities, the county?
I think Go ahead, Eric, please.
Well, that's a cultural problem we have here with the number of municipalities, and working together is obviously going to be an issue. But what I can tell you, the real issue is geography. So we have barriers that we can't actually grow out of. So the Atlantic to the east, and actually the St. John's water management to the west. So realistically, smart has to be upward. At some point, it's going to be upward, and obviously that's a challenge in and of itself, because you don't want to be. A lot of people don't want us to become Fort Lauderdale, Miami-Dade, which that's the assumed way that we're going to grow.
With all the high rises on the beach.
Correct.
I mean, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But we already can't see the beach from A1A.
No.
So what does it matter if there's a building there or not? I mean, I don't know. When I first met my wife, she was from California, where she said on the roads you can just look out and see the beach the whole way, but here you don't. So there's like one little stretch at the Air Force Base you can look over and actually see the water. But so yeah, that'll be interesting to see what happens. There's already A lot of talk about height restrictions, especially in like Satellite Beach.
Satellite
and
Beach,
stuff. Yep.
bingo, is one
Right
of those
now.
examples where you would see a beachfront community that's bedside that's now turning into at least a part of their area that they've had that hasn't been developed in a while. That South Beach or that South housing area is now going to be an epicenter for economic growth. I mean, it's
Right.
just going to happen.
Wow. It looks like the Randy Fine race is still pretty close. With 17 of the 35 precincts in, Randy Fine's got 53% of the vote, and Anthony Yance has about 47. Are you surprised? That's a pretty good showing for Yance, who has never held political office, if I'm not mistaken, right?
That's correct.
He's a
That's correct.
virtual newcomer to.
Absolutely. He kind of has a John Fetterman look, tattoos and kind of regular guy look. He's got the exclamation point after his last name, kind of taking the Jeb Bush model for his campaign signs. But yeah, this kind of showing 47%. I think that's a strong showing. A little bit closer than we had anticipated. Definitely a strong showing, and I'm sure that we're gonna see Anthony Yance in the future.
Palm Bay, one of the most politically diverse cities in our county. It's almost a third in terms of voter registration. Palm Bay actually being one of the only two, if I remember correctly, municipalities that are a majority of Democrat voters. So by and large, as you expand that district out towards South Melbourne or other areas, that's where Randy Fine is picking up most of his support. Obviously, as we were talking about earlier, mail ballots will lean more towards Democrats, but as Chris has noted, as soon as we get those Election Day results, I think we're going to see what we expect. Maybe a little tighter, maybe 9%, maybe even 8 or closer, but I'm thinking it's still going to go the way that we've seen.
For somebody like Anthony Yance, and not him in particular, but a newcomer who's showing up pretty well so far tonight, what would you, if he loses, what would you recommend somebody like that run for next if his interest is in politics? On the state level still, or to drop down maybe to the county level, or local?
Well, if I was giving him advice, I'd tell him to start local first, municipality. I mean, it's basically comes down to basic math. When you're talking about a state house election, you're talking about, in that case, I think it's, if I'm wrong, 133,000 voters in that
That's about the size of a district.
Right. So what you're talking about is, since it's a 50-50, it's a binary election, you win or lose. Only one other opponent. You say you have to get 50% plus one. So that would, I mean, when it comes to it, that's a lot of votes that you got to get. If you start your first candidate at the city of Palm Bay, even though that's a pretty large municipality, the districts in and of themselves are smaller. So if I'm not mistaken, I think it's even though a citywide election in terms of voters voting for all of the districts. Is that the same? Chris, is that how it goes, or is it
At
district?
yes.
At large?
Right.
So technically, Palm Bay's not a great example, but if you look at places like a smaller municipality, you get your feet underneath you, you learn the mechanics of a campaign, you actually get donors. I mean, think about how much money that he would have had to have raised to actually compete with the amount of, let's just say, statewide or Tallahassee dollars that Randy Fine could have had access to.
Well, I think since he's run for the state legislature, I think he should, keep focusing on that level. I mean, maybe going lower kind of looks like, just trying to get in just to get my foot in the door. The other thing is definitely the money issue. Democrats in Brevard County just are outmatched on fundraising, so that would have to improve. And also, I think the message, and I think this was reported in Florida today, that Randy Fine might be in trouble because of his stand on cultural issues. The Disney Reedy Creek issue and Don't Say Gay and abortion and some of that was going to come back to hurt Randy Fine. And obviously that wasn't the case. Again, I think Democrats have to come up with a series of issues that is going to resonate with voters who tend to be voting Republican.
Yeah. A quick story. You had mentioned Jeb Bush, and I met him here when he was a speaker at a graduation at Eastern Florida. And somebody snapped a photo of him. I was interviewing him, and he has his hand on my arm, and it looks like he's asking me for advice. So I always wanted him to win, so I could post that photo somewhere. I'm advising the president
You
or
were his,
whatever.
you were his advisor.
Yeah, exactly. So the two really big races locally, we have 93 precincts in of the 171, and Kimberly Musselman is at 53%. Renee Torpy at almost 47%. And the school board, we've got 17 of 34 precincts in, and Gene Trent is holding on to the 53. He's at 53%. For 47% for Aaron Dunn. So if those hold, then Gene will be on the school board. And
Well, that would definitely, I think, alter and move the ideological direction of the Brevard County School Board. It's been a pretty moderate board compared to some of the other officials that have been elected here in Brevard County. So this bringing it back would I think make it a little more of a conservative school board than it's been in the past few years. And with 50% of the precincts reporting, I think closing that gap is going to be very difficult for Aaron Dunn now.
yeah, and judicially, if it holds, we will see. Kimberly Musselman, take the bench, and I think there were already either 5 or 6 former prosecutors as judges. Is that good?
Well, that's a great question. I kind of like to see judges that have a background in working as a public defender or on the defense side, and then also being on the prosecution side. I think having that balance, being on both sides, I think is a very important quality that we have in our judges. So maybe too prosecutorial centered can be troublesome.
Yeah.
I think that also speaks to that broader cultural question about, are you hard or soft on crime? I think if the voters drew anything from that, it was putting a prosecutor in a judicial position. Meaning, and you can see this when it comes to Republican versus Democrat majority areas. You're seeing policy difference that are so contrast when it comes to criminal justice that what I expect, at least from that news, is to say our voters are saying we want judges to be a little bit more tougher on crime than it would be in other areas, which I'm not surprised, because of our voter base being who they are.
And why is there that actual divide? As a nation, as a people, don't we want the bad people locked up? But if they make mistakes, we should have them released, because there's nothing more un-American, in my opinion, than incarcerating somebody who's innocent.
Oh, absolutely. That's we're supposed to be, innocent until proven guilty, due process of law. Absolutely, those are American ideals that we all covet. But as Eric pointed out, right now, the perception is crime is up. It's up big, and the murder rate is up, substantially across the country. But the perception is crime is up. It's up big, and we want to get tough on crime, and that's a winning message right now.
And what's the cliche? Perception is reality. I think it
right.
mostly has to do with voters' perception, but also, if we're talking about criminal justice on a broader sense, that's one of those touchstone issues that really casts the die between a Democrat and a Republican. So it's one of those do not enter kind of topics as far as one side versus the other. And as you're seeing in some states, including more left-leaning California, even some of their prosecutors that have been softer on crime are being recalled. So, the question is, how much of that perception is reality?
Wow. So we're wrapping it up here shortly, guys. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we sign off, or?
Well, I didn't get a chance to weigh in on the tax ad valorem millage
please.
for the school board. And again, we were talking off air, but the school board budget's $1.5 billion. We just had 6 years of a sales tax that just expired. Now we're coming back for more money. Palm Bay's budget's $232 million. It takes 7 Palm Bays to make up the budget of the Brevard County School Board. At some point, somebody's going to have to say, we have enough money. We just need to allocate it, appropriate it more effectively and more efficiently. Tax increases is not always the answer.
Are you saying that there's too much, fat at the top?
I'm saying that there's enough money to make sure that our teachers are paid competitively, with other counties and other districts, and that if you're going to increase people's teacher pay, you got to have a resource to keep that funding going.
I have to wrap this up right now. It has been great chatting with you two guys. Don't go away. Chris is going to be right here talking about the state elections and all that stuff. So thank you very much. I'm John Torres, and thank you for watching.
Lights, camera, action. Discover the arts at Eastern Florida State College, where you can train for exciting careers and gain personal enrichment in programs for the performing and visual arts. You can earn an associate's degree as a stepping stone to a bachelor's degree at another college or university, making Eastern Florida